It is Black History Month, and I am one who enjoys to definitely read about the history of Black America, but not just in February. I like to do it year-round. And lately, I purchased something called the Slave Narratives. It is an anthology of works that are chronicles, first-hand stories of individuals who had to survive the brutality, make it through, push through, even learn to read and write in many cases, and then write that story so that others could hear just how resilient the slave had to be in order to carry on. One of my favorites, though, and the one that has stood out to me as just a marked work of excellence, is the narrative of this man. His name is Frederick Douglass. Writing in the late 1800s, rose from slavery to prominence as one of the greatest abolitionists that our country has ever known. And his narrative, the narrative of Frederick Douglass, the story of an American slave, is one that has not only grabbed me, but I think it is specifically tailor-made for our generation. He's writing as a younger man, as a young adult, and as he's writing, I think some of the same things we are facing today are some of the same things that he faced back in the 1800s. I want to read some excerpts so that we can grab out of his story one principle that I think we all need to hear. And it is going to be a difficult read for us, but I even think more difficult than the read, it is going to be this principle that we're going to have to grapple with. I want to suggest that the greatest enemy of our generation is loneliness. If there is something that young adults and young professionals in the United States of America are facing today, and we are losing on every front, on every battlefield, we are losing the war against loneliness. And I think Frederick Douglass gives us a little bit of a clue as to why that is. We're going to start with a narrative where he is talking about his slave master, his first one, Captain Anthony, and his aunt named Hester. I want you to look with me, page 20 of his book, Narrative of Frederick Douglass. Captain Anthony was a cruel man, hardened by a long life of slave holding. He would at times seem to take great pleasure in whipping a slave. That page continues. I remember the first time I ever witnessed this horrible exhibition. I was quite a child, but I well remember it. Now, I want you to know that it's hard for Frederick Douglass to know how old he is because there was no record of his birth. Therefore, he is consistently guessing throughout his narrative how old he is and how old he was during certain times. Therefore, it is believed and estimated not only by Douglass but also by scholars that he is about 4 or 5 years old at the time when he witnesses the whipping of a slave for the first time. He continues, Aunt Hester went out one night, where or for what, I do not know, and happened to be absent when my master desired her presence. He continues, he had ordered her not to go out evenings and warned her that she must never let him catch her in company with a young man who was paying attention to her, belonging to Colonel Lloyd. His name is Ned. He continues, why master was so careful of her may be safely left to conjecture. She was a woman of noble form and graceful proportions, having very few equals and fewer superiors in personal appearance. Douglass would go on later on in his narrative to state that it was widely known that Aunt Hester was the most beautiful woman in the county, slave or free, white or black, widely known as the most beautiful woman in the county. But something happens. I think a little bit of Valentine's gets to Aunt Hester. And this partner of hers named Ned, and although she was strictly warned against moonlighting with Ned, for love's sake, she was willing to take the risk. It just so happens that on that fateful night, as Frederick Douglass writes, his master actually looked for her during the night. He talks about it's safe to conjecture because he's trying to be very politically correct in his writing. But we all know that a slave master looking for the one that he kept his eye on most in the middle of the night is looking for her for one reason: company, intimacy. Some may even call it rape. And so when he looks to find her, he does not, and instead finds her with Ned. Frederick Douglass continues on page 21 of the book. Aunt Hester had not only disobeyed his orders in going out, but had been found in company with Lloyd's Ned. This was the chief offense. He continues, her arms were stretched up at full length so that she stood upon the ends of her toes. And after rolling up his sleeves, he commenced to lay on the heavy cowskin. And soon the warm red blood came dripping to the floor. He continues, notice this is a 4 to 5 year old child remembering this. I was so terrified and horror-stricken at the sight that I hid myself in a closet and dared not to venture out till long after the blood transaction was over. I expected it would be my turn next. Listen to this. 4 or 5 year old child sees this and says, after he's done with her, he's going to come for me too. See, the tragedy of slavery is what it did to the children. He ends this segment by writing this. It was all new to me. I had never seen anything like it before. He would whip her to make her scream and whip her to make her hush. Frederick Douglass, New England, 1845. I want you to look at this picture on the screen, as this young man is representative of Frederick Douglass hiding in a closet watching this happen to one of his family members. A beautiful creation of God that many said was the most beautiful creature in the county. And yet that creature was marred all because of prejudice and bigotry. This young man is forced to watch. Now I'm reading this narrative, and I'm just saying, man, I already know Frederick Douglass is going to escape slavery. I've heard the stories from time to time, have read some excerpts. I know for a fact that Frederick Douglass becomes a free man. So although I'm having to read about such brutality and look at my history, and truly my heart goes out to anyone who is my complexion in the United States of America, who traces their heritage back to slavery, because for you to be here today means that Aunt Hester's survived. That Aunt Hester's still got up every morning and attempted to do their best to make sure that the next generation had it a little bit better than they had it. They had children, and those children had children, and their children are alive today. I'm saying, thank you, Frederick Douglass, for escaping. But it wasn't until towards the end of the book that I start getting a glimpse into something else. A secret I'm expecting for Frederick Douglass as he's recounting all these horrific tales from his childhood into manhood. I know he just can't wait to escape until I get to page 92 and read these words. Watch this. This blew my mind. He says, "It is impossible for me to describe my feelings as the time of my contemplated start or escape drew near." He continues, "I had a number of warm-hearted friends in Baltimore, friends that I loved almost as I did my life, and the thought of being separated from them forever was painful beyond expression." Man, please pay attention to this paragraph. "It is my opinion that thousands would escape from slavery who now remain, but for the strong cords of affection that bind them to their friends." Notice he's saying that after all of this brutality, there was one thing that kept people in slavery. It was not fear of death. It was not fear of punishment. He says here that the one thing that kept them the most was their attachment to their friends. He finishes out this section by saying, "The thought of leaving my friends was decidedly the most painful thought with which I had to contend." As I'm looking at Frederick Douglass's picture, I'm saying to myself, are you serious? I've just spent hours reading all of the brutality and dysfunction that you are in, and you're saying that the one thing that almost kept you planted on a plantation was your friends? He even goes on to say that there would have been thousands of more other individuals who were enslaved at the time that he's writing his narrative that should be free, except for one thing: their friends. And I'm saying to myself, I think I'm starting to get why it's so hard for us to leave our negative social circles behind and walk towards freedom from sin. I want you to look at this narrative, and this is what I mean by Black history has encouraging words for all people. It doesn't matter where you come from, because Frederick Douglass is telling me one thing. He's saying, beware, O generation of the future. There is one thing that you will face when it comes to climbing out of your dysfunction and climbing into new freedom: your friends. Beware, generation of the future. Understand that there is one thing that you are battling with that's going to keep you returning back to a master that abuses you day by day, only to see you go to bed saying, but I'm still going to stay. Your friends. Frederick Douglass is trying to give us a secret. There is something we're all struggling with, and we're losing the battle with it. There is one thing that's keeping us rooted in our sin and is not giving us this rite of passage into freedom. It is our friends. If friends can keep a man who has to watch brutality every day for all of his life in chains on a plantation, how much more then can your friends keep you in sinful chains in your city, on this campus, in your clubs, your fraternities or sororities? I'm trying to wrestle with the fact that there's one thing that's hurting us, and that is our friends. I want to explain a text that I think gave me this is why. This is why. Psalms 25, 16 and 17 reads this way: I am lonely and troubled. Show that you care and have pity on me. Verse 17, my awful worries keep growing. Rescue me from sadness. I started this sermon by saying there is one great arch enemy that all of us are facing, our generation, and we're losing. It is loneliness. Frederick Douglass is not saying that it was just the connection to people on the plantation that almost kept him there instead of going out for freedom. He's saying it was the prospect of being lonely that almost kept me there. It was the prospect of leaving behind connections that actually made me feel wanted and appreciated. It was the prospect of now going into freedom, into an environment that I'm not familiar with, to people that I do not know, and hoping somebody there accepts me. Frederick Douglass is saying the same thing David is saying: I am lonely and I'm troubled. One of the things that makes Valentine's so hard for individuals is loneliness. That's why we are so quick to run to romance to alleviate that tension. That is why we are so quick to get into a relationship instead of looking in the mirror and dealing with the real issue. The real issue is not that I feel I have to have a significant other. The real issue is this: I'm lonely. I want to be touched, and I want to be touched gently. I want to be kissed, and I want to be kissed with love. I want to be accepted. I want someone to look to me because I'm strong. I want someone to look to me and say, you're capable. There's something we're all struggling with, and many of us are losing. It is the battle against loneliness. And if we are honest, our generation does not want to come into the freedom away from sin and its bondage because we are afraid of what it looks like on the other side. We are afraid of true freedom. Freedom scares us. Freedom is one of the most frightening things for our generation. And I know that seems to be something that's counterintuitive because we're always talking about, I want to do my thing. We're always talking about, I want to get my way. Yo, I'm just going to do me and you do you. It sounds as if we want freedom, but what we really want is people to accept us for who we are. We are deathly afraid of being lonely and out there by ourselves because we are seeking freedom. I want you to remember this for the rest of your life. Freedom chasers are the loneliest people you will ever meet. People that really sell out. I'm talking about all in for it. I'm talking about going to extremes just to make sure they're finally free. Those are the loneliest people you will ever meet. And there are individuals on this campus who I have talked to and I have observed, and they look very lonely, but I have been convicted in my heart that they are only lonely because they're truly, legitly concerned with being free. That they are not letting social circles define what they do, who they are, and where they're going. There are individuals on this campus who have decided to be lonely instead of deciding to be intimately close with people. There are people on this campus who are just like Frederick Douglass, who are willing to say, yo, my name is lonely. There are some parties that you won't go to. There are some people that you won't chill with. There are some posts that you will not like. And there are some phrases that you will never retweet. Yes, people will stop following you. People will be like, yo, where you been at? And individuals will even make you feel less than because you are no longer mirroring your environment. But in that moment, I want us to commit ourselves to saying, that's okay because my name is lonely. I am lonely. I admit it. There are some things that I wish I had, and I'm desperately desiring community. But if I have to choose between community and freedom, I am going to be free. Because there is no way that sin is going to keep me on its plantation while it abuses everyone in my immediate environment just so that I can say I was loved. Frederick Douglass says there were thousands who stayed in shackles because they were afraid of leaving their friends. And I say today in 2015, there are thousands of God's people in this generation who live in shackles because they are afraid of losing friends. As a musician comes to play, I'm looking at John 8:34 and I'm reading it. Jesus replied, verily, verily, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Verse 35, now a slave has no permanent place in the family. What is Jesus saying? Sin really doesn't love you. Sin could care less about you, and sin really doesn't want anything to do with you. You serve a purpose. And that purpose is being exploited every time you allow yourself to not shine the glory of God, but to reflect the darkness of a fallen world. But here's the promise that ends these three texts. John 8:36 reads this way. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I love the part of the book when Frederick Douglass, he pulls up to a train station. He writes that he cannot tell in detail the path that he took on the Underground Railroad for fear that those who read it would shut down those avenues for those who will come after him. But he does pick up the narrative on that morning when he hears the train stop. and he's in the cargo carriage. And he slides open that door, and he talks about the air that just floods the compartment. He talks about what it was like as he put both feet that were tattered from his journey into the gravel by the train station. And he said that for the first time in his life, he walked as a free man. And he starts reflecting on the slaves who are his friends that he left behind, and some he even calls by name. But he says to himself, it was worth it because I'm a free man. It was worth it because now I'm looking around and there is no overseer. There is no plantation house. There are no shanties that I am supposed to call my abode. But now I got a new shot. I'm a free man. There's no one who tells me when to wake up, and there's no one that tells me when to go to the field. There's no one who tells me who to sleep with and who to love, just so that I can be bred and just so my children can come into slavery with me, because I'm a free man. I answer to no one. I am my own person. I have now received my freedom to choose. And I'm a free man. That should be the testimony of our generation. That the journey is tough. And yes, it's very lonely. But freedom is worth it. Yes, you will remember the friends that you have left. You will mourn the relationships that have been lost. But allow the fresh breath of the Holy Spirit to waft over you and flood the compartment. As you place your tattered feet on the gravel of salvation, and you stand to look at a world brand new, because you can now say, I'm not mastered by my desires. I'm not mastered by the people around me, but I am only mastered by the Creator that made me. I'm a free individual. I think there's an individual or individuals here that desire that type of freedom, and that can, in a moment of transparency, admit that you have not been living in that freedom. There are some things that have kept you shackled and kept you stationary when it comes to your spiritual growth, and you're willing to admit, it's some of my friends. No shade on the friends, just speaking real. I need to get free, and I can't allow my human relationships to hold me back from that. What I want you to do in this moment is I want you to stand to your feet and just move to one of your aisles. That's all. I want you to stand to your feet. If that's you, you're saying, I need that type of freedom, but I can admit I got a social circle that's keeping that from happening. I want you to stand to your feet where you are, and I want you to start your journey. Frederick Douglass says, on that morning, there were some things I was contemplating that made me hesitate from taking that step towards freedom. And it was the thought of the relationships I was going to lose. But he made it, and he pushed through. I want you to stand and just move to one of your aisles closest to you. And I want you to just stand out there in the aisle, and I want you to stand before God and before humanity, and I want you to say, I want that type of freedom. My new name is lonely. And yes, there will be times when you see me, and I will wish that I had greater community. But until God introduces me to a trustworthy community, I will be lonely as I journey towards freedom and leave shackles behind. You're standing and you're moving to the aisles. I know there is at least 2 more people. I feel it. There are at least 2 more people in here that know it is your social circle that's holding you back. You know it. And I want you to stand. I want you to move towards one of these aisles, whichever one is closest, and I want you to say, God, I want freedom. And I'm willing to break off those relationships and compassion and love. I'm willing to take the step to get out of that romantic relationship to look to my boyfriend, to my girlfriend, to look to my best buddy, to look to my roommate and say, yo, real talk, I'm not trying to be mean or judgmental, but my new name is lonely. And I got to go get my freedom. God, it is a sobering word indeed. But I think you've lifted up a principle of the black experience that is relevant to all people, all nations, all tongues, all cultures. God, our generation is not carrying forward the testimony of freedom. We're making excuses, talking about some other things like, hey, we're all imperfect. Hey, he's working on me little by little. He's not through with me yet, God. And we throw out these cliches when in our hearts we know the problem. We're not separating ourselves from the influences that call us back into a lifestyle, into bad habits, into addictions that we're trying to give up, that we're trying to let go. But God, today we claim the promise of John 8:36, that when the Son sets us free, that when we allow him to guide us on a journey, that yes, is lonely at times, for not even he had a place to lay his head when he walked on the earth. Not even he had friends who supported him in his moment of greatest trial. He was lonely. But we claim that he was victorious, even in his loneliness. And now he is the emblem and symbol of freedom for all humanity. Make those who are standing right now that same symbol. Make it to where they can say, as Paul says, follow my example as I follow Christ. Give them the courage to step away from what is shackling them. Specifically, the human relationships that are holding them back. Be with them in their loneliest of times. And make sure you give them the courage to keep going until their feet hit that solid ground that they can build upon, building a new lifestyle and a new dream. I pray this prayer, God, believing that not only have you heard us, but that you see us. Honor the contrite spirit and the broken heart in this place and give them what they're asking for. In the name of Jesus, I do pray. Amen. You may be seated.